All right, so before we really get into a lot of the details and the peculiarities of perfect competition, let's review the dimensions of market structure for perfect competition. So in perfect competition, we have many buyers and many sellers, okay? Many buyers, many sellers. Now, even though there are many of them, they're not all the same necessarily, but there's lots of them, okay? Market power, all buyers and sellers are price takers. Now, we're mostly going to focus on the fact that sellers are price takers, but the buyers are also price takers. There's not really a lot of negotiating or really any negotiating the price in perfect competition. You go find this product, you want to buy it, you take the price, whatever the price is given. The seller also had to take the price. Why? Because all the other sellers are selling for the exact same price. If they lower the price, it'll get bid back up to the original price. If they raise the price, they won't sell any at all. Okay, so buyers and sellers are all price takers. There are no barriers to entry and exit. Anyone can get into that industry and sell. And if you're tired of selling or you have some reason to stop selling, you can leave the market with no consequences. Product differentiation. In perfect competition, we have a homogeneous product. Everybody is selling the exact same thing. Nobody notices any difference between one product or another. Now, because of this homogeneous product, this is one of the reasons why perfect competition doesn't actually exist. There are always differences, some kind of difference between the products. For example, Walmart sells it in a larger building where you can buy a whole bunch of other stuff, and that's a big deal. So you may go buy it from Walmart instead of buying it from a convenience store on the corner. The convenience store is charging a higher price for the homogeneous product, and you're thinking, how can they do that? They're supposed to be price takers. Yeah, well, technically speaking, the convenience store has brought the products closer to your house. The grocery store is a little farther away, and that's why in that particular circumstance, it may look like just because the product is homogeneous doesn't mean that everything about the product is homogeneous. Because the product is closer to your house, that store feels like they can charge a higher price. So now, even though the product itself looks the same in its physical properties, it is not the same in that it is being sold in a place that is closer to your house. That makes the product a little bit different, okay? But in perfect competition, what we're talking about today, the product is literally the same distance from your house. It's being sold in the same kind of facility. It is the exact same product. There's no difference. You can't identify any difference at all between, seller A and seller B in how they're selling the product. And then perfect information. Information symmetry in perfect competition. Everybody knows everything. Also very unrealistic. Also the barriers to entry, having none, very unrealistic. Okay? And so especially these three dimensions of market structure, they're so unrealistic that perfect competition doesn't really exist in its purest form. Professor Ryan, why in the world are we studying it if it doesn't actually exist? Because there are many industries that are close to perfect competition. And if we can understand the dynamics of perfect competition, we can then take those ideas, modify them just a little bit, and apply them to the industries that are close to perfect competition. Okay? All right, so one of the things that I said previously that I said I'm going to make an argument for is that the demand curve for a firm in perfect competition, that their demand curve is horizontal, it's sideways, it's flat. And I'm going to help you understand that by doing something that we have already done before. We're going to do a numerical example. Let's say that this is one particular firm and there are several possibilities. They could produce 0 units, or they could produce 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 units. They're only going to choose one level of production, and we're going to see what their revenues and their marginal revenue will be at those different levels of production. But first, we need to fill in the price. Now, previously when we have done examples like this, as the quantity goes up, the price goes down. Why? Because of the law of demand. The law of demand says that there is a negative relationship between price and quantity. And we're not breaking the law of demand. It is still true in the overall industry graph for a homogeneous product. The demand curve is downward sloping. We do have a downward sloping demand curve. But this is not the entire industry. What we have here is one individual competitor. And what we said is that for a homogeneous product, that they are price takers. That means that no matter what quantity they sell, the price is going to be the same all the way down. They can't change the price. They don't have the freedom to change their price. So let's say that the price is $5, okay? So now what I want you to do is, I want you to go ahead and calculate total revenue for all of these different possibilities. All right, so I've gone ahead and filled in. Hopefully this is what you got. Remember, total revenue is equal to price times quantity, right? So quantity times price is total revenue. So 0 times 5 is 0, right? All the way down. This times 4 times 5 is 20, 6 times 5 is 30, etc. Notice that price is flat. Price is level, okay? And so the way that we would draw that, this price line on a graph would be a horizontal line because it's the same, okay? Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for marginal revenue. Do you remember, to find marginal revenue of the first unit, we take the total revenue and subtract away the previous total revenue, right? So 5 minus 0 is 5. So the marginal revenue of the first unit is 5. The marginal revenue of the second unit, we're going to take total revenue for 2 units is 10, subtract the total revenue for 1 unit, 5, 10 minus 5 is 5 again. Can you go ahead and calculate all the rest of the marginal revenues? All right, something very interesting happened here, right? What we now have is that marginal revenue is also all 5, and that makes sense. In a situation where the price is not changing, the price actually is the amount that total revenue is going up by. And so for perfect competitors, for price takers, price will always be equal to marginal revenue. They are going to be the exact same thing. What we're going to do now is we're going to take that information, we're going to take the information from this table, and we're going to draw a market graph, we're going to draw a market structure graph for one particular firm. All right, so now what we're going to call this, instead of a market structure graph, we're going to call it a firm structure graph. So this is going to be one firm, one perfect competitor, okay? And so here's what we understand. Do you remember how we said that the way you get the price, let's say that we have I'm just going to jump to a previous example. We have a demand curve, we have a marginal revenue curve, we have a marginal cost curve, and we said the first thing you're supposed to do in this situation is find the profit maximizing quantity, and we know that that's going to happen where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, right? Okay, so where those two intersect, we're going to come down and we're going to identify that that is the profit maximizing quantity. And then we said the next important job is to find the price that this firm should charge. Now, this is a price setter, not a price taker, so we're gonna take a break from price taker just for a second. And what we do is we go up the quantity line where we go to the demand curve, right? And then we go over, and that determines our price that we're going to charge to maximize our quantity. Why are we going to the demand curve to get the price? Because demand represents a relationship between price and quantity. So the demand curve is representing the price of the product. So if we're going to the demand curve to get the price, but in a perfectly competitive firm, we already know what the price is. the price is being given to the firm from the overall industry, from the overall market, and the market is saying your price is set at, in this particular case, $5, but we're just going to say P. So the price that you are taking is set, and it's not changing. And so if we're supposed to go from different quantities up to a line to get the price, if we go up this quantity, we will stop here at the price because we're priced. If we go up this quantity, we'll also stop at the same number. No matter which quantity that we go up, we are always stopping at the same number for price because we are price takers. And therefore, that line will be a horizontal line. Well, what we're looking at here, since these are all quantities and this is price, this horizontal line is representing the relationship between quantity and price. And the thing that represents the relationship between quantity and price that determines the price in a market is the demand curve. But for a perfectly competitive market, it's going to be horizontal instead of downward sloping. And I said previously, where I was eventually going is I'm going to show you why, mathematically, logically, why for perfect competitors, the demand curve is horizontal instead of downward sloping. And so in a perfectly competitive firm, the demand curve, instead of being this downward sloping curve, we're going to change up the market structure graph or the firm structure graph. And now you're going to look at a graph that has a horizontal demand curve instead of a downward sloping demand curve. But that's not all. There's another curve that's going to change. Look at your table that you just created with the quantity, price, total revenue, and marginal revenue. Look at the marginal revenue column. Isn't that interesting? Doesn't the marginal revenue column have fives all the way down? 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Another one that's not changing. So marginal revenue also, as quantity goes up, marginal revenue is not coming down. We're not seeing the law of diminishing marginal benefit. What we're seeing is a constant $5 all the way across. And therefore, in a perfectly competitive market, the marginal revenue curve is also going to be horizontal. Marginal revenue curve, in that particular case, it's 5, right? So at every quantity, when you go at 0, marginal revenue is 5, right? At 1 unit, marginal revenue, or not 0, excuse me, at 1 unit, marginal revenue is 5. At 2 units, marginal revenue is 5. At 3 units, marginal revenue is 5. 4, 5, and 6, all marginal revenue of 5. And what that indicates is that marginal revenue is also a horizontal line, marginal revenue. And then the last thing I want you to notice is that price is 5, marginal revenue is 5, and that means that those two horizontal lines are actually sitting on top of each other. And therefore, the marginal revenue line is actually right on top of the demand curve, but the way that we understand that in microeconomics is we say that the demand curve is the marginal revenue curve. They are the same curve. And so now, instead of having two separate curves, a downward sloping demand curve and a steeper downward sloping marginal revenue curve, instead, in perfect competition, we have a single curve. This demand curve has tilted up, the marginal revenue curve has also tilted up, and now we have a single horizontal curve, which we call the demand curve, and the marginal revenue curve. They are the exact same curve. And now we're going to dig deeper into that idea as we continue learning about perfect competition. All right, so what we're going to do now is we are going to sketch the firm structure for a perfectly competitive firm. And the reason we're going to do this is because I've already shown you what a market structure graph looks like, and if you look at the perfect competition firm structure, you're going to say that doesn't look like what you showed us. You taught us how to identify all those curves, but these curves, a couple of them look a little bit different. So what I need to do right now is I need to show you how we're going to have a difference. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and draw in a marginal cost curve, because the marginal cost curve is not changing at all. The marginal cost curve is the same in perfect competition as it is in the original market structure graphs that we learned. Also, average total cost is the same. That doesn't change. It still hits marginal cost. It intersects marginal cost at its lowest point, and it curves down as it approaches marginal cost, and then it curves back up. And so that's our average total cost curve, same as you have already learned. And now the average variable cost curve is also the same. So I'm going to go ahead and hit a low point here, just like with average total cost. Marginal cost intersects average variable cost at its lowest point, and it curves up there. Now remember, average variable cost, as quantity increases, gets closer and closer and closer to average total cost. And so that is our average variable cost curve. Looks the same, right? No difference here between perfect competition and all of the other ones. But here's the point at which you would draw in a downward sloping demand curve and a separate downward sloping marginal revenue curve. And here's the big difference with perfect competition, is that instead we're going to draw in a horizontal line, and that horizontal line, let's make sure I get it horizontal here, that horizontal line is representing the demand curve, and it is also the marginal revenue curve. Sorry, I had to squeeze in an MR there. Let me redo that. That line, this horizontal line, and you know that this is a perfect competition firm when you see that horizontal demand curve. Demand is equal to marginal revenue. When you see that, you know that this is perfect competition. It is not monopolistic competition. It is not monopoly, and it is not oligopoly. It is perfect competition, okay? Now, here's the thing though. The reason for that, I want to remind you, the reason for the horizontal demand curve is because they are price takers, right? So when we go to quantity, when we go up to the demand curve to determine the price, we're going straight over the demand curve. That's the price, right? So I can put over here P, right? That's the price, the given price. No matter what quantity we go to, we come up with the exact same price, no matter what, okay? But note that marginal cost is changing, average total cost is changing, and average variable cost are both changing all three of those are changing as quantity is increasing. So the cost structure for a perfect competitor is no different than the cost structure for a monopoly or a monopolistic competition or for oligopoly. The only thing that's different is the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve. So then the question is this, are these perfect competitors stuck forever at that price? Do they have to always sell at that price for all of their existence? If that company is in business for 200 years, do they always have to sell at that price? No, they don't have to always sell at that price. We're going to have fluctuations in the price, but not at the firm level. We're going to have fluctuations in the price at the market level. Okay, so we're going to come down here, and what I'm going to do here is this is the market for this product. This is an individual firm. This is all of the firms. It's like an aggregate market, but it's the aggregate for one product. It's not the aggregate for the entire economy. So let's come down here and say that for this product, let's say that we have a supply curve and we have a demand curve. And when we come over here, we identify the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. The equilibrium quantity is not relevant right now, but we have our equilibrium price. And here's what I need you to understand, is whatever that equilibrium price is, that is the price that is given to the perfect competitor. It is determined by equilibrium, okay? And so let me show you basically one way that we can understand this. If I get rid of this and this, okay, that if we, in any market, the overall market with overall demand and overall supply, what we can do is, see this blue horizontal line? Wherever supply and demand intersect, okay, that is where we are going to create a horizontal line that goes right through the intersection, and that creates the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve for all of the firms in this market. They are now all taking this demand curve and marginal revenue curve, which intersects where market supply and market demand intersect, and now they can all break off into their individual firm structures. Now here's the interesting thing about all of those competitors. Let's say that there are 500 of these competitors all selling the exact same homogeneous product. They are all taking the same demand curve, but each one of them is going to have a different marginal cost curve, a different average total cost curve, and a different average variable cost curve. And that is what is going to make perfect competitors different. They're going to be different based on their cost structures, not based on their demand curve. Okay? So that's important to understand. So what's going to happen to this demand curve if there's an increase in price in the overall market? Well, if you think back, in the previous segment, we said that there could be an increase in price if the demand curve shifts to the right. So if the demand curve shifts to the right, okay, we'll have a new demand curve. Look at that, demand prime. And look, the intersection, the equilibrium price in the market has gone up. And so what's going to happen is the demand curve that is given to the perfect competitor, this horizontal line is going to shift upward. And now we have this is firm. I'm going to put a little F down here. That's the demand curve for the firm, where this is the demand curve for the market. The firm demand curve, I'm going to put DF prime. They now have an increase in price. And the way that would reflect up here in the firm structure is this curve would shift upward. It would move up to here, and now in this perfect competitor would have an increase in price. They can now charge a higher price, which wouldn't necessarily affect their cost structure at all. Okay? And so that's an important dynamic for perfect competition. The other possibility is that the supply curve might shift to the left. So if the supply curve shifts to the left, let's see here. Here's our old demand curve. If the supply curve shifts to the left, then again, we'll have an increase in price. The new intersection for demand and the new supply, we'll put S prime here. There will be an increase in the equilibrium price because the demand curve and the supply curve are both intersecting here, meaning the new equilibrium price for the market is higher. So if, and you already have this in your notes, if demand increases or supply decreases, there will be an increase in price in the market, and the demand curve for all the individual firms in their structure, the demand curve will shift up vertically. But the same thing can happen for a decrease in price if in the market, see, as you can see here, I have decrease in price. We have a demand curve, we have a supply curve, okay? Again, here's our demand curve running horizontally through the intersection point. Okay, there's our demand curve for the firm. That's D, and we'll put a little F down here. Demand curve for the firm. Okay, it's also the marginal revenue curve for the firm. If demand decreases, if the demand curve shifts to the left, we have a decrease in demand. Over here, D double prime. Look at that. The price has gone down. We will have a decrease in demand for the individual firms, and the firm demand curve, put a little F there, will decrease. And up here, this horizontal line will shift down. Okay? The cost structure will stay the same, ceteris paribus. Only the price and the demand curve, marginal revenue curve, would decrease. The exact same thing will happen if there's an increase in supply. If the supply curve shifts to the right, it'll now intersect the old demand curve here and again result in a lower price. We'll put S double prime there. And so, to summarize, if supply increases or if demand decreases in the overall market for that homogeneous product, it'll cause a decrease in equilibrium price, which means a lower price for the price taker to sell at, and its demand curve will decrease. Okay? And so that is the dynamic of the firm structure. And now we're just going to look at one more thing. We're going to look at this same graph right here, and we're going to see what happens if the cost structure changes.